I'm going to now just celebrate some of the stuff that has been achieved over the last 5 years. As Bishop Graham talked about, this is worth celebrating. The church has worked often quietly, often not with much fanfare over the last 5 years to try and work out that calling, that vision that the Archbishop sort of set us on. This idea that credit and finance should not crush people but contribute to the common good. So I'm going to look a little bit at running through a few of the things that have happened, highlighting a few of the things that have happened over the last 5 years. And forgive me, I'm not going to be able to fit everything in because the actions that have happened, the beautiful spiralling of good news happening across the country is not going to be captured in a few slides, but I hope we can just sum it up a little bit. Just to set the scene of why this was really sort of called out. We're looking back at 2012, 2013, which was the height of the success of the payday lenders. As you know, we had the credit crunch, as it was called, seems a very long time ago, in 2008 after the financial crash. And that flourished payday lenders. And they were set out really to just lend as a one-off for people just who needed a little bit just to tide them over. But the reality for many was that people used them for everyday spending to make ends meet, and to cover bills, to cover loans, and it became a chasing spiral. They were accessed very easily with very little credit checks going on, and at some times Wonga's interest rate, when the Archbishop of Canterbury spoke out about it, was 5,853% APR, which I don't know about you, but I think eye-watering is the right word. Other high street lenders charged similarly. And in 2012, £3.7 billion was borrowed that way. £3.7 billion was borrowed at such interest rates. So you can see why this was something that the church spoke out about. And soon, obviously, there were calls for legislation. Stella Creasy being one of the first MPs to really raise this as an issue, calling this kind of lending legal loan sharking, but other charities, consumer bodies, and then the Archbishop of Canterbury. The profile of the campaign was raised by his involvement, and the church got behind this as well. And churches campaigned on the high street, wrote to MPs, and took other action. And this voice made a difference. In 2014, legislation was passed to cap the interest rate, and that came into play in 2015. A victory. A very straightforward victory, but one that was very hard fought. And interest rates fell. They were capped at quite a low rate, still pretty high compared to what you might get elsewhere, but it's a massive difference. And default charges were also capped. And what was the result of this? Well, according to an FCA study, the Financial Conduct Authority, who were involved in bringing the cap in, they found there was no evidence of illegal money lending. So it wasn't that people were going to illegal money lenders, this was actually just stopping people borrowing at these horrendous rates. And crucially, they calculated 760,000 people saved £150 million a year on interest payments over the time that the cap came in. It also found that this use of these loans massively decreased from 6.3 million in the first half of 2013 when they were at their peak to 1.8 in 2015. And that just goes to show how many of those loans were actually being made to people who should never have been lent that money. They should never have passed credit checks. Citizens Advice said complaints dropped about payday lends 86% between 2013 and 2016. This legislation was a good piece of legislation. It did curb the problem. Over the coming years, many high-cost lenders have gone into liquidation. Some have been forced to pay back where they shouldn't have lent through credit checks, and Wonga themselves had to do this. And their income has tumbled, and they have, until very recently, made losses. They have now restructured, interestingly, the new CEO coming in and saying that their governance had been strengthened and they had rationalised their operation. So perhaps they are reformed. Now, of course, payday lending hasn't gone away. There are still high interest lenders on the high street, and there are still questions about whether this cap should be extended to other high interest borrowing, such as the rent to own sector, things like Bright House, some of you may be aware of. But this piece of campaign and this piece of legislation that the church had a real hand in has changed things, and for that I think we should rejoice. Meanwhile, the church also took other action. The positive call sparked the church's imagination, and hopefully to set about to create this alternative economics, the one that serves the common good and not just profit. Some highlights of that: the Church of England set up its own credit union for clergy and church workers, and this is an across-denomination church mutual credit union. It currently has 3 million in assets, so it's doing extremely well for a credit union, and it continues to flourish. As well as that, the Church of England did an audit and realised they had a lot of primary schools. And so a financial education programme called Lifesavers was set up and piloted in some schools to see if helping children to understand money in a values-based context would prevent future borrowing problems. And then on the ground, as we've already heard about, intensely local and relational work was done in the churches, supporting credit unions, offering other community finance initiatives, and also the Church Credit Champion Network, as it was called then, encouraged church members who with the right expertise to help volunteer at credit unions. The legacy of this work is the foundation of the Just Finance Foundation. This organisation has been established now to take forward this work, among other things, supporting a network of workers across the diocese across England to tackle financial exclusion and grassroots at local community level through relationships. So what's all this change meant? Well, there has been growth in the credit union sector over the last few years. ABCUL are the trade body for credit unions, an increase in lending by 6% and saving by 6% in the last couple of years. And there are about 2 million members now of credit unions, over £1.4 billion on loan. But there's far more work to do. As we're going to hear from one of our speakers, Anna, later, the credit union sector is still a tiny proportion of the lending in this country. It still remains a minnow compared to some of the high street lenders. And this community finance, this relational finance, has a long way to go, but we are going in the right direction. On the prevention side, Lifesavers as a programme is now rolled out to 100 schools, and it's supported by Virgin Money and also by the government to combine values-based financial education, as well as, interestingly, a savings club in a school run by a credit union. 17,000 children over that now have benefited, and nearly £55,000 has been saved in credit unions over the last 2 years of the programme by children, and children run the savings clubs themselves. So it's encouraging for the next generation. And in the areas where the Credit Champion Network was piloted, there's been a marked rise in church awareness of local credit unions and church involvement in local credit unions, and the need for these conversations to happen, this fairer finance. What does it look like to have an economic system that works for all of us? That those conversations are happening. In the Diocese of London, the area that we're in, we were part of that pilot. And 139 parishes took part over the couple of years. That's about 1 in 3 parishes in the Diocese of London, either running workshops in churches talking about money and asking these questions, or supporting credit unions practically and financially. And now in London, Capital Mass, which is my role, is set up the Capital Mass Just Finance role to continue this work, to continue to seek this momentum in the Diocese of London. So we're here now to support churches across London to respond to needs in their communities around credit and debt, whether that's supporting credit unions, encouraging churches to look at budgeting courses, helping people with their money, looking at debt advice and how we can help people who are in financial crisis. There's support for our diocese in all these different ways as we seek a truly just financial system. So there is much to celebrate. Much has been done in these last 5 years, and we can and should celebrate that. So that's what we're here to do tonight. The church is at the heart of a positive change in our society around finance. It may feel small compared to the problems, but it is intensely relational and intentionally in the image of God.